But what were we talking about?
Caviezel playing Christ.
He did something, I think, that nobody else did. And I think he pulled it off because I totally believed it.
I believed it too.
And it was like, what did he do? He emptied himself out.
Yeah.
And he invited something else in.
Mel Gibson telling us why the Ethiopian Bible really got banned turns a forgotten religious question into something much darker. Because this is not only about an old book sitting outside the version most people know. It is about who decided which writings stayed, which writings disappeared, and why one ancient Bible still carries material many believers have never been shown. That is what makes the mystery feel serious. The Ethiopian Bible is not a rumor from the internet. It belongs to one of the oldest Christian traditions on earth, and its pages raise a question the modern church has never fully escaped. If those writings were harmless, why were they kept away from most of the Christian world? And if they were dangerous, what exactly made them dangerous? Mel Gibson's connection makes the question even harder to ignore because he has spent years around biblical subjects that most filmmakers would never touch. So when his name becomes linked to the Ethiopian Bible, people do not only ask what was removed, they ask who had the power to remove it. The deeper this investigation goes, the less this feels like a simple religious debate. So why was the Ethiopian Bible pushed outside the Bible most people know, and what did it contain that made it so feared? The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church holds a Bible unlike the one most Western Christians know. Its official canon contains 81 books, supported by a church with about 36 million adherents. That makes it larger than the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox canons, and the largest biblical canon in traditional Christendom. The Book of Enoch is one of the names that makes this canon so unusual. Alongside the Book of Jubilees and the 3 books of Maccabean, it appears as scripture in Ethiopia while remaining outside every other major Christian Bible. For the Western Church, these are not just missing pages. They are entire sacred texts never placed inside the Standard Bible. Mel Gibson enters the question because his biblical work is documented in a way most celebrity claims are not. He spent 12 years researching and funding his film with about $30 million of his own money. The Passion of the Christ used Latin and Aramaic, consulted religious historians, and became the highest-grossing R-rated film ever made. Gibson's name now appears across many online videos making dramatic claims about the Ethiopian Bible, but those claims rarely trace back to a primary interview, a clear date, or a sourced statement. That matters because the investigation cannot begin with internet noise. It has to separate what online videos say from what is actually documented. The New Testament gives this subject its strongest reason to be investigated. One unique Ethiopian book is directly quoted inside the Bible every Christian already reads, yet that source book is missing from most canons. As one line could put it, the quote survived, but the book did not. That is the real mystery. The Ethiopian Bible's unique content is real, named, and documented. But the question becomes much harder once we follow the New Testament quote back to the book most Christians were never given. Jude gives the investigation its clearest starting point. In 1:14-15 he writes, "Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone." The detail matters because Enoch is not mentioned casually. Jude names him, places him after Adam, calls him a prophet, and treats the words as a real warning. Enoch becomes harder to dismiss once the source is checked. The line in Jude is not just similar to another ancient tradition. It matches 1 Enoch 1:9 closely enough that standard biblical scholarship treats it as a direct citation. That means the New Testament writer was reading the Book of Enoch and using it as prophetic material, not simply repeating a vague religious memory. Jude is accepted in every major Christian tradition. Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, and Ethiopian churches all keep the letter in the New Testament. That means every Christian Bible carries this quotation, even when readers do not know where it came from. The line survived inside the canon, but the book behind the line did not survive there for most Christians. Ethiopia is the exception that changes the question. The Book of Enoch remains inside the Ethiopian Bible, where it has been treated as scripture for roughly 1,600 years. Western Christian Bibles do not include it, so the same book that was important enough for Jude to quote became canonical in one ancient church and absent in the West. Jude's quotation creates the real mystery. If Enoch was authoritative enough for a New Testament author to quote by name as a prophet, and if that letter became accepted by the whole church, then the question is unavoidable. Why did the book Jude was reading end up outside most Christian Bibles, while the quotations stayed inside Scripture? The issue is no longer whether Enoch existed, or whether the Ethiopian Bible is real. The deeper question is why a book quoted in the New Testament survived as Scripture in Ethiopia, but disappeared from the Bible most Christians inherited. Hippo and Carthage are where the Western answer begins. The Council of Hippo in 393 CE and the Council of Carthage in 397 CE helped settle the biblical canon for the Latin Church, under the strong influence of Augustine of Hippo. Then Jerome's Latin Vulgate, completed around 405 CE, gave that canon a lasting form for Western Christianity. Ethiopia was not in those rooms. The Kingdom of Aksum, in modern Ethiopia, had already become officially Christian under King Ezana around 330 to 340 CE, making it one of the earliest Christian nations. But it developed outside Roman Church authority. So when North African councils shaped the Western Bible, Ethiopian Christianity was already walking a different road. Enoch was not removed by one dramatic order. The issue was regular use and church consensus in major centers like Alexandria, Rome, and Carthage. Books that were not widely read in those influential places were pushed to the edge. So texts like Enoch were not always condemned. They simply failed to become part of the Western standard. Chalcedon made the separation deeper in 451 CE. After the council, the Ethiopian church followed the Miaphysite tradition and stood apart from both Rome and Constantinople. That distance mattered because Ethiopia did not have the same pressure to narrow its canon. While the West moved toward one accepted list, Ethiopia preserved a broader biblical world. Banned is the word that makes the mystery sound simple, but the truth is more complicated. There was no clear decree saying Enoch must be destroyed or condemned. As one careful summary puts it, it was not a single ban, it was a slow exclusion. Still, the process was not neutral. Powerful men, theological concerns, and church politics shaped which books survived inside the Bible most Christians inherited. The missing books were not simply lost by accident, and they were not all formally banned. To understand why Enoch made Western leaders uncomfortable, the investigation has to look at what the book actually says. Genesis 6:1-4 is where the missing question begins. In only 4 verses, the text says, "The sons of God came to earth, took human wives, and produced the Nephilim, described as giants." Then Genesis moves on. It does not explain who those beings were, why they crossed into the human world, or what the Nephilim really were. The Book of Enoch matters because it answers the part Genesis leaves open. First, Enoch gives names, numbers, and a full scene behind those few verses. It describes 200 watchers, angelic beings who descended to earth under Semjaza, took human wives, and produced giants who consumed all the acquisitions of men and began to sin against birds, beasts, and reptiles. The text turns a short Genesis mystery into a complete picture of the pre-flood world, with rebellion, violence, and corruption spreading through creation. Enoch's explanation creates a serious theological tension. In this version, evil enters the world through autonomous angelic beings who choose to break the divine order. That is different from the later Western focus shaped by Augustine, where Adam and Eve become the center of human corruption through original sin. Enoch does not erase the garden account, but it gives another origin of evil, and that made the book harder for Western Christianity to absorb. The heavenly visions make the book even more difficult to treat as ordinary commentary. Enoch describes a heavenly court, personal journeys through multiple layers of heaven, and detailed eschatological visions about judgment and the end. Western Christianity kept fragments of these ideas through other texts, but not in Enoch's full, organized form. The missing book was not small. It carried an entire spiritual map. Tertullian's defense shows the exclusion was never simple or unanimous. In the 2nd century, he argued for Enoch's authority, even saying it was rejected because it was considered too old. That argument matters because it proves early Christians were already debating the book's place. Some did not see Enoch as dangerous fiction. They saw it as a text with real authority that the church was choosing not to carry forward. If Enoch explained the Watchers, the giants, and another path for evil into the world, its disappearance from the West was not a small detail. The next question is how the complete text survived at all, and why it survived most clearly in Ethiopia. James Bruce entered Ethiopia in 1769 as an explorer, not a church scholar. He was a Scottish adventurer and geographer looking for ancient places, routes, and records. But when he returned to Britain in 1773, he carried something far more important than travel notes: 3 complete manuscripts of 1st Enoch in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopian Christianity. A book the West thought was lost had been sitting inside an African Christian tradition. Bruce's announcement did not receive the welcome he expected. The 18th century biblical establishment had almost no room for the idea that Ethiopia had preserved a sacred text the Western world had lost. Some scholars dismissed the manuscripts as late forgeries without properly examining them. The reaction matters because it shows the deeper problem. The issue was not only whether Enoch was real, it was whether Western scholars could accept where it had survived. The Ethiopic text became the only complete version of 1st Enoch available in any language for more than 170 years. Greek and Aramaic fragments existed, but they were broken and incomplete. The full work survived in the canon of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where it had not been treated as a museum object or a strange side text. It had been read as scripture, while the West argued over whether it could even be trusted. Qumran changed the argument between 1947 and 1956. Fragments of 1st Enoch were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Judean desert, written in Aramaic, and matching the content preserved in Ethiopia. That discovery pushed the text far earlier than any church canon decision. It confirmed Enoch was not a late Ethiopian invention, but an active Second Temple Jewish writing that early Christianity had inherited. The Dead Sea Scrolls vindicated Bruce almost 2 centuries after he carried the manuscripts home. The text was genuine, ancient, and connected to the same book quoted in the New Testament. The Ethiopian Church had not invented Enoch. It had preserved the book that much of the Christian world lost, while Western scholars spent generations doubting the very manuscripts that would later be proven real. The discovery proved Enoch was ancient, not imaginary. But it also made the mystery harder. If Jewish communities were reading it before Christianity formed, why did the Western Bible leave it behind? Cave 4 at Qumran gave the investigation its strongest archaeological evidence. Multiple fragments of 1st Enoch were recovered there, representing parts of at least 5 manuscripts. That number matters because it shows the text was not sitting on the edge of interest. The community was copying it, preserving it, and treating it as a text worth carrying forward. Book of Jubilees appeared in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well, which made the Ethiopian connection even stronger. About 15 manuscripts of Jubilees were found at Qumran, more copies than some books now found in the Bible. That detail does not prove every group saw Jubilees the same way, but it shows the Ethiopian canon preserved books that once had serious ancient authority. Second Temple Judaism is what the scrolls clearly confirm. Enoch and Jubilees were not late inventions, and they were not isolated Ethiopian traditions created centuries later. They were copied before church canon decisions, inside the wider scriptural world from which Christianity emerged. The evidence proves these books belong to the religious atmosphere surrounding the birth of the Christian movement. Dead Sea Scrolls evidence still has a limit, and that limit matters. The fragments cannot prove the early Christian church formally treated Enoch as canonical before later excluding it. They show authority at Qumran, not a final Christian category in the first generation. As the evidence can honestly say, the scrolls prove use, they do not prove canon. 68 CE creates the sharpest gap in the timeline. The Qumran community was destroyed by Rome around that time, decades before Christian canon debates began in full. So the books that community preserved did not automatically move into the later church consensus. That leaves Jude still sitting in the middle of the mystery, quoting Enoch, while the Western Bible eventually left Enoch out. The scrolls proved Enoch was ancient, copied, and respected. But they did not explain why the Western Church accepted Jude's quotation while leaving the quoted book outside the canon. Tertullian makes the exclusion of Enoch much harder to treat as a clean decision. Around 200 CE, one of the major early Latin Christian voices argued that the Book of Enoch should be considered scripture. In On the Apparel of Women, he defended its authority openly. which means Enoch was not simply forgotten. It was still being argued over inside Western Christianity as late as the 3rd century. Enoch's rejection had a very specific shape in that debate. Critics did not only attack it as fake or useless. Tertullian said some rejected it because it was too old. That phrase matters because Enoch claimed to come from the pre-flood world, long before Moses, the prophets, or the apostles. In a church increasingly focused on apostolic connection and controlled canonical authority, extreme antiquity could make a book suspicious instead of stronger. Jerome pushed the Western canon in a different direction during the 4th century. As the scholar behind the Latin Vulgate, he gave lasting weight to books connected to what he saw as the Hebrew Old Testament. That position did not only affect Enoch, it also created tension around other books Catholics later kept. His influence shows that the Western canon was shaped by language, theology, and scholarly preference, not by one universal agreement from every ancient church. Augustine of Hippo added another pressure point. His theology became central to Western Christianity's understanding of sin, evil, and salvation, with Adam and Eve at the heart of human corruption. But Enoch gave a different kind of explanation, where fallen angels helped bring evil into the world through rebellion and forbidden contact with humanity. A canon including that full vision would have complicated the Western focus on original sin. Ethiopian Christianity did not move through the same debate. For the Ethiopian church, Enoch was not a lost book later recovered by scholars. It was part of Scripture from the beginning of its tradition, accepted within its own ecclesiastical authority, and still canonical today. While Rome and the Western Church narrowed their list, Ethiopia preserved the wider canon without needing approval from Constantinople or Latin Christianity. The exclusion was contested, not automatic. And once one major early church father defended Enoch, the investigation has to ask which explanation for its removal actually survives the evidence. Mainstream scholarship gives the cleanest official explanation for why Enoch did not enter the Western Bible. The book failed the emerging tests for Scripture: apostolic connection, agreement with accepted doctrine, and regular use in public worship. In places like Rome, Alexandria, and Carthage, the text did not have enough steady liturgical use to gain wide approval. So by the time the 4th century councils shaped the Western canon, Enoch was not treated as a conspiracy problem. It was treated as a book outside the growing consensus. First, Enoch also carried content that made the decision less neutral than it first appears. The book gives major weight to angelic rebellion as the reason evil spread through the world, while the Western tradition increasingly followed Augustine and placed Genesis at the center of human corruption. In that framework, Adam and Eve's choice became the foundation of original sin. Enoch did not simply add extra detail. It offered a large competing picture of where evil came from, and that created real theological pressure. The Vatican conspiracy version is the weakest explanation. The record does not support the idea that the Western Church secretly coordinated the destruction of Enoch manuscripts or suppressed the Ethiopian Bible by force. Enoch survived openly in Ethiopia, where it remained scripture without a documented Roman campaign to eliminate it. Even Tertullian argued for its authority in public, without evidence that he was silenced by an organized institution. The stronger mystery is not a hidden police action. It is how exclusion happened through influence, preference, and time. The strongest explanation is a combination of history and theology. Enoch failed to gain enough liturgical use in the major centers that shaped the canon, but its content also created serious theological complications for the direction the West was moving. As one careful way to put it, the strongest answer is not a secret order, but a contested narrowing. This makes the exclusion more interesting than a simple ban, because it shows Western Christianity did not just inherit a Bible, it shaped one through pressure and choice. Jude's quotation keeps the problem alive. Whatever reason is given for leaving Book of Enoch outside the Western canon, it still has to explain why a New Testament writer quoted Enoch by name as prophetic scripture. The Church accepted Jude as canonical, but not the book he was quoting. That tension has never been fully resolved by any mainstream Christian tradition, and it is the detail that keeps pulling the investigation back to the same question: why keep the quote and lose the book? The most realistic answer is not simple suppression, and it is not a neutral accident either. It is a slower, stranger process, one where theology, geography, and authority decided what most Christians would never read. The Western Church narrowed its Bible through a slow consensus shaped by geography, worship, and theology. In that process, Enoch, Jubilees, and the books of Maccabean were left outside the canon most Christians inherited. Ethiopia moved differently. It developed outside that same authority structure, and because of that, it preserved a wider biblical tradition instead of following the shorter Western list. Ethiopian Christianity did not preserve Enoch by accident. The church had roots older than the Western canon debates, developed outside Rome, and separated further after Chalcedon in 451 CE. That independence mattered. Enoch survived there because Ethiopia was never forced through the same filter that excluded it elsewhere. For Ethiopian believers, the book was not recovered later. It had always been scripture. The Book of Jubilees shows exactly what kind of material the West lost. In its version of the Exodus account, the angel Mastema, not God directly, is connected to hardening Pharaoh's heart. That changes the pressure inside the story. The plagues are no longer framed only through Pharaoh and God. Another spiritual force enters the scene, changing how responsibility is understood. R.H. Charles brought Enoch back into modern scholarship through his 1912 translation from Ethiopian manuscripts, the only complete source available. That translation influenced C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien in their thinking about fallen angels. Even Tolkien's Ainur in the Silmarillion can be traced intellectually to ideas preserved in a book the West had forgotten, while Ethiopia kept reading it as scripture. The most honest framing is not that the Ethiopian Bible was simply banned. A better line is, Ethiopia preserved what the West narrowed away. That makes Mel Gibson relevant without needing every online claim about him to be proven. His documented interest in early Christianity makes the question fair. Did the Western tradition lose something important when it left these books behind? The realistic version is stronger than the conspiracy version, but it still leaves one question open. Why did the Western Bible keep Jude's quotation from Enoch, while leaving Enoch itself outside the book? The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church gives this investigation its final confirmed point. Its 81-book canon includes the Book of Enoch as scripture, and that same book is directly quoted in Jude. That makes the problem unusually specific. Enoch is not only an extra Ethiopian book, it is a book named as prophetic by a New Testament author, while remaining outside the canon of most churches that accept that same New Testament. That is why the question cannot be dismissed as curiosity about a foreign Bible. Mel Gibson matters here because his documented work on the Passion of the Christ points toward the same larger issue. Whatever he has or has not specifically said about the Ethiopian Bible, his 12 years of research into early Christian history showed how complex the ancient world around Jesus really was. The languages, customs, politics, and texts behind the faith were not as simple as the later Western canon makes them appear. The Ethiopian Bible becomes one of the clearest surviving signs of that complexity. Ethiopian Orthodox Christians have the most direct answer to this problem. They do not believe their Bible is missing anything. From their view, the Western Bible is the incomplete version because it kept Jude while leaving out the book Jude quoted. The Jude quotation therefore becomes their strongest internal evidence. It supports their belief that Enoch was never a side text, never a lost curiosity, but part of scripture that other traditions narrowed away. Protestant, Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox traditions have never produced one full doctrinal answer that resolves the Enoch problem completely. The common explanation says Jude could quote Enoch the way a modern writer might quote Shakespeare, without making Shakespeare scripture. That answer is consistent up to a point, but it leaves one word sitting in the text without an easy explanation: prophesied. Jude does not only borrow a poetic line, he presents Enoch as a prophetic voice. Jude 1:14-15 leaves the final tension inside the Bible itself. Every Christian who has read Jude has read a direct quotation from a book not found in most Christian Bibles. For 1,600 years, the Christians still reading that quoted book as scripture were in Ethiopia, inside the largest biblical canon in traditional Christendom. The final question is not whether Enoch existed or whether the Ethiopian Bible is real. The question is why the quotation stayed everywhere while the book stayed almost nowhere. Jude 1:14-15 remains in every Bible, but the book it quotes from remains in the Ethiopian Bible and in no one else's.